see everybody here today. And again, if you're visiting with us, thank you so much for choosing to come and worship God here at North Highlands. We hope that you're encouraged and drawn closer to your Creator through your time here with us. And we hope that if you're looking for a church home, that you'll just plant yourself right here and grow along with us. We've got some wonderful things happening here at North Highlands and some great things to look forward to in the future. And so if you've got your smartphone or other device, I encourage you to follow along with the sermon in the YouVersion app, and then use that again later on this week for a family devotional time and discuss and rehash some of the things that we'll talk about this morning. This is the second lesson in a series that we're doing called SquadGoals. And the idea behind it is that our squad or our church, our team, we are trying to be more like Jesus, individually and collectively. We want to be a church that truly is of Christ, as our name says. And so we want to be more like Him. And to become more like Him, we're going to have to immerse ourselves in His Word. We're going to have to listen carefully to what He's teaching us. Not only the red words, but all the words of Scripture are inspired of God. They are His words to guide us into the life that He has designed for us, that He wants for us, the best life possible. And this morning we're going to look into 1 Corinthians chapter 4, just in the first few verses there. And I think hopefully we're going to glean some truth there, some understanding there that maybe we don't notice right off, but yet is there nonetheless. We're used to being judged at this point in our lives, aren't we? We're used to being judged. It's become second nature. From cradle to grave, we're being evaluated, we're being criticized, we're being compared, we're being judged over and over again. It starts when we're very young, doesn't it? I remember when my kids were little and they were still in diapers, and sometimes I might smell something, Sorry, y'all. And I would smell something and I would just say, Leanne, something's wrong over here. But Leanne, as the mother, and you've seen other mothers do this, she would go to the child and she would pick the child up, look it in the eyes, and then she would turn to its backside and stick her nose really close. And I don't understand why moms do that. It would blow my mind. I mean, I could identify it from across the room. That something's bad, But I mean, she loved them so much, I guess. Is it love? She would just get right. Yep, somebody made a stinky. And it was this. And so from a very young age, I assume all mothers have always done this, because this is what I've seen mothers do. From a very young age, we're used to getting picked up, judged, and said, you must be changed, right? This happens over and over. So we're conditioned from infancy to be judged, to be considered, for a verdict to be brought down. You're dirty. You're unclean. You need to be cleaned. You must change in order to be okay. And this starts very early, but it goes throughout our lives, doesn't it? In school, we have to wear certain clothes or we're judged. We have to act a certain way, say certain things. We get evaluated based on our performance over and over again, all through our lives. This is happening over and over again. And so when we look in this passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, it's something that should be very familiar to us. See, last week we discussed the beginning of our goals as a church and individually is to surrender. If we're going to be like Jesus, we're going to have to surrender, each of us and collectively. We said our responsibility for the maintenance of our spiritual condition is to surrender. That this is really what it's about, is surrendering our lives to Christ. And now this week we're going to get a little bit more personal, like those moms like to do. And we're going to read here in 1 Corinthians 4, and then take a critical look inward at our own motives and our own thoughts. Read along with me there in 1 Corinthians 4. It says, let a man so consider us as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required in stewards that one be found faithful. But with me it is a very small thing that I should be judged by you or by any human court. In fact, I do not even judge myself, for I know of nothing against myself, yet I'm not justified by that fact. But he who judges me is the Lord. Therefore, judge nothing before the time until the Lord comes, who will bring to light the hidden things of darkness and reveal the counsels of the hearts. Then each one's praise will come from God. Now these things, brethren, I've figuratively transferred to myself and Apollos for your sake, that you may learn in us not to think beyond what is written, that none of you may be puffed up on behalf of one against the other. For who makes you different from another? And what do you have that you did not receive? Now, if you did indeed receive it, why do you boast as if you had not received it? See, if we're to become like Christ as Christians, we must surrender to Him, relinquish the throne of our hearts, and then behave with gospel humility. That's what's being taught here. Gospel humility, a humility that only comes from really knowing Jesus. And this gospel humility must become our most noticeable and significant characteristic. When people think of you, what they should think of as a Christian is your humility. Your ability to sympathize, your ability to not talk about yourself, your ability to have a listening ear and a patient heart, ready and willing to accept some of the burdens that someone might need you to help them carry. That we would surrender to Christ, and because of that surrender, we would now be humble in the presence of others, in seeking what's best for them, and not necessarily what's best for us. First this morning, will you be found faithful? There in verses 1 and 2, as we were just reading, Paul's inspired by the Spirit to say, so let a man consider us as stewards of Christ, servants of Christ, and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it's required in stewards that one be found faithful. You see, everything actually belongs to God. In Psalm 24:1, it says, the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness, the world and those who dwell therein. He says, it's all God's. It all belongs to God. In Romans 11, in verse 36, I like what the way the New Living Translation translates this. It says, for everything comes from Him and exists by His power and is intended for His glory. He says everything is about Him. It's all about God, and it all points back to God. See, if you're surrendered to God, He's going to lift you up. He's the one who will lift you up. He's the one who will bring to you what should be brought to you, rather than you continuing to chase after and force these things that you want. He's going to lift us up, and He's going to bless the sacrifice of humility that we make in every instance. You know, although the sacrifice of self-indulgence, the sacrifice that we make of self-will, the sacrifice of self-gratification, the sacrifice of self-glory, when we recognize who Christ is, those sacrifices don't seem like sacrifices anymore, do they? They seem more like an investment in eternity. In Hebrews 13 and verse 15, it says, therefore by Him let us continually offer the sacrifice of praise to God. That is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to His name. But do not forget to do good and to share, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased. Will you be found faithful? Are you making those sacrifices of doing good? Are you making sacrifices to make sure that others are well? That you would supply whatever need it is that they have that you have the ability to meet? That you would choose to even give of yourselves in order that someone else might have more. We do it for our kids easily, don't we? It seems easy. It seems second nature to do it for our kids. But what about everybody else? Because that's what the Bible is calling us to do. That if we're going to be like Christ, we're going to do it for them. For God so loved the world that He gave. And so let's give. There are good things that He's purposed for us to do from the beginning of time, that you are here and you are now, and it is up to you. Will you be found faithful? It's a good question to ask ourselves. And how will you be found faithful? Secondly, I want to talk about our ego just a little bit, because it's overinflated, swollen, and inflamed, isn't it? There in verses 3 through 5, the Spirit says, but with me, it's a very small thing that I should be judged by you or by any human court. In fact, I don't even judge myself. Paul is saying, listen, I don't worry about what you think of me. I don't worry about what any human court thinks of me. And I don't think he's specifically talking about actually going before a judge right here. He's talking about the court of opinion that we face every day, that we've faced since the time we had the dirty diaper at the very beginning, and that we will continue to face all the way through life. The judgments that come at us at a rapid pace, the evaluations that continue to happen in our lives. He says, you know what? I'm not worried about what you think of me. But he says, but you know what? I'm not worried about what I think of me. I'm not going to allow this to pull me down or to somehow puff me up. It's a very small thing that I should be judged by you or any human court. In fact, I do not even judge myself, for I know nothing against myself. Yet that's not what justifies me. He who judges me is the Lord. You see, the Lord is the one that will answer to. The verdict that you're looking for, that you're hoping to attain by wearing the right clothes, by saying the right things, by being in the right places, by having the right friends, by being a part of the right group, the verdict that you're hoping for is never going to satisfy you. The only verdict that matters is the one that comes from your Lord, Jesus. When Jesus looks at you and He brings the verdict, that one matters. Are you faithful or are you unfaithful? Was I faithful this morning or was I unfaithful? Am I going to be faithful today in this moment or am I going to be unfaithful? Am I choosing to be faithful to Him and put aside myself, my ego, set it aside so that Christ shines through rather than the selfishness that so easily comes through? We want to know so badly who we are, but we search in all the wrong places. Rather than seeking selfish goals, Christ calls us to seek His goals, which is the salvation of the souls of everyone who you might be able to influence. Luke 19:10, of course, He said, the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. And then He tells us in Mark 16:15-16, this is what you're going to do now. Go into all the world and preach the gospel, the good news, which is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. You go and you tell that to every creature. He who believes and is baptized will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned. The human ego is so overinflated and swollen and inflamed. Not just those egos that are outside this building, but those that are inside this building. Not just the one sitting in the pew, but the one standing in the pulpit. Our egos, they're so overinflated, swollen, and inflamed, either through self-esteem or through self-pity. You know, they're both the same sides, the different sides of the same coin. Whether we're drowning in despair over our self-pity or we're so puffed up that we can't even recognize which way is up. Either way, both of those are warring against what Jesus has actually said about us. Soren Kierkegaard, in his book, Sickness Unto Death, he said this: it is the normal state of the human heart to try to build its identity around something besides God. Spiritual pride is the illusion that you are competent to run your own life, achieve your own sense of self-worth, and find a purpose big enough to give you meaning in life without God. And we see it all the time, don't we? We see it all over the place, especially in those who can afford to chase after whatever they want. You see it in the news. You see it written up anywhere where anyone will take any interest at all at the exploits of rich and famous people and how they try to fill the void in their life because they know something is deeply wrong. They know that something is deeply empty and they want to fill it so badly. And we're no different. We have the same struggle with our ego. We have the same struggle because it's been going on from the time that we were very little. And we need to consider our ego, and it's that identity within us that wars against our God-given identity. I'm going to try to illustrate this with a balloon, y'all. I'm sorry that it's orange. Leanne picked the color. Okay, see, our egos, they're empty. They're empty, and so they want to define themselves by our abilities and our achievements. But your self-worth can only be judged properly by the sacrifice of Christ. Remember, Paul's inspired and he says, it doesn't matter what you think of me. It doesn't even matter what I think of me. All that matters is what Jesus thinks of me. And that's how we have got to bring ourselves to. That's the point where we must arrive. Anything less is empty. In Romans chapter 8 and verse 18, it says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for that revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope." He subjected it in hope. There's an emptiness that needs to be filled. And we just continue to fill our egos with more emptiness, chasing after whatever it is that we're interested in this world, hoping that it's going to somehow make us feel better, make us feel anything, make us feel something. And so we keep going after these things, and nothing seems to fill us up. In fact, we find ourselves more and more empty the more things we chase. The human ego is also painful. If you came into church this morning and you heard someone say to someone else, "How are your toes?" you would immediately recognize, well, something must have been wrong with their toes, right? Because you don't just talk about your toes. You know, I didn't come in this morning and say, "Man, my elbow's really doing good today. Check it out." Because we don't talk about things that aren't hurting, right? We don't think about them because they're just part of our bodies. They just work. They just do what they're supposed to do. Unless they're hurt, unless they're damaged, unless something's wrong. Until something's wrong, we don't even talk about it. We don't even notice it. You see, the ego has got something incredibly wrong with it. Yourself, myself, our identity has something terribly wrong. Because it's always calling attention to itself, isn't it? Try to get on a treadmill at the gym and you're doing good, and then you look over and there's a mirror. You know what I'm talking about? You're trying to exercise, but you can't exercise because all you can think about is what you look like. And either you're proud or you're ashamed. One way or the other. That ego, it's broken. Why would we do that if something wasn't wrong? Why would we feel this way about ourselves every time we see a mirror if something's not terribly wrong with our ego? It's always calling attention to itself. Every day, you and I are watching how we look, how we get treated by others, how others react to the things that we say. We can't get through a day without feeling snubbed somehow, or maybe ignored, or feeling stupid, or feeling superior, one way or the other. I go through all of these just in my car on the way to the building. We do this every day. This same fight, the same battle that's going on in our hearts. And it's a battle for your heart, for your soul. Will you be found faithful? If you choose to be faithful every single day and fight this ego that is within each one of us. There's something horribly wrong with our ego. Our sense of self is broken, and the only place for repair is Jesus Christ. It's coming to Jesus. It's falling down at Him, surrendering our sense of self to Him so that we accept and take on the sense of self that He gives to us. What does He call you? My beloved. He says, I've written these things that you would think, that you would learn to not think beyond what is written. Well, what's been written about you? What has God said about you? He's called you His beloved. He said that you're righteous, that you're redeemed. He said that you're saved. He said that none of these judgments that you feel in this world today matter. He says that you're His child and that He loves you so deeply that He gave His life for yours. What does God think about you? Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. It does not parade itself, and it's not puffed up. It does not behave rudely. It does not seek its own. It is not provoked. It thinks no evil. It does not rejoice in iniquity. It rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. God is love. 1 John 4:8. This is how God feels about you. And He's calling you to now surrender to this identity where you too can become love, where you too can become more like Him, that you then give that love to other people. He knows you're in pain. And He says, you come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, I'll give you rest. Jesus felt it when He was in that garden. He fell down and He cried, not my will, but yours be done. Not my will, but yours be done. He says, I can't handle this anymore. I know that only you can handle it. Now, our egos, they're empty. They're painful. They're also very busy. It's incredibly busy trying to fill itself, comparing and boasting, comparing all the time, checking everybody else out, comparing where we stand, and then inserting ourselves wherever we are on that ladder of success or of beauty or of whatever it is. It's so busy trying to figure out who we are rather than surrendering to Christ and taking on a gospel humility that knows who we are. All the comparing and boasting, it falls far short of the true identity that we have in Christ. He says you're a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. You are His special people. And why are you these things? That you might proclaim the praises of Him who called you out of darkness in His marvelous light. He says, come out. You can be filled up with Christ. You don't have to be empty anymore. You don't have to be pain anymore. You don't have to be so busy trying to figure this out. You can surrender to Christ and take on a gospel humility. Because the ego is also fragile, isn't it? Anything that's overinflated is about to be deflated. If you're puffed up and not filled up with His Spirit, you'll never realize who you are or what you're here to accomplish. You're never going to get that verdict that you so desire. To know yes or no. Guilty or innocent, true or false. You're never going to find that verdict until you pop that ego and you realize my identity comes from Christ. So you get rid of that. You say, you know what? It doesn't matter what you think of me. It doesn't matter what I think of me. All that matters is what Christ thinks of me. When are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? You need to do this. I need to do this. We need to step in line with Christ. Because until we do, we're just going to keep floating around empty. We're going to keep floating around, not accomplishing what God put us here to accomplish, not doing those good things that need to be done, and always seeking something and never, ever finding it. To be inflated or to be deflated, it's really the same thing, isn't it? To have high self-esteem or low self-esteem, which our society says, well, if you've got high self-esteem, well, you need to be humbled. You need to have lower self-esteem. And if you have low self-esteem, well, you need higher expectation. You need better self-esteem. I want to give you tell you what you're good at, right? And so we start thinking about these things and we feed the ego over and over again, never realizing that it's empty and painful and busy and fragile, and it can't handle this load. The only thing that will deliver us from the emptiness is the fullness of Christ. In John chapter 1, as John is describing Jesus, in verse 14, he says, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld His glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father. What was He full of? Full of grace and truth. That's what'll do it. That's what will end the rat race. That's how you stop the looking in the mirror on the treadmill. That's how you stop the wondering what everybody thinks. That's how you come to Christ and you say, this is all that I am. He's full of grace and truth. And if you want to be like Him, you must fill yourself with grace and with truth. You have an infinite supply of grace given to you by your Father, and you have His truth right there in front of you in the Bible. So fill yourself with His grace and His truth. Take on the fullness of Christ. In verse 16 there in John 1, it says, and of His fullness we have all received grace upon grace. And he could just go on and on, couldn't he? Upon grace, upon grace, upon grace. The air you breathe, the fact that you woke up this morning, the fact that you have the ability to make a decision for Christ, to accept His verdict and to reject all the verdicts of this world. See, we don't accept the verdicts of other people or even the verdicts that we call down upon ourselves. Instead, we live according to the verdict of Christ. He took our place in condemnation. We've been delivered, we've been rescued, we've been saved, and now we're called the beloved. And so, if I'm going to be found faithful, I'm going to find my identity in Him alone, no longer in the things that I can do or the things that others think of me. Instead, I'm going to find my identity in Christ and what He's done. And this is the humility of a surrendered soul. Verses 6 and 7. Now these things, brethren, I've figuratively transferred to myself and Apollos for your sakes, that you may learn in us not to think beyond what's written, that none of you may be puffed up on behalf of one against the other. For who makes you differ from another? And what do you have that you did not receive? Now if you indeed received it, why do you boast as if you had not received it? You see, together as His church, we overcome. We're more than conquerors. As we become more like Christ, His fullness becomes our fullness. He fills us up and He brings us to a place where we now are able to make a difference in this world. We don't even think beyond what has God written about us. And we stop allowing our mind to cast false verdicts at us. You see, you are who God says you are. And together, we're His unstoppable force for good. We're the ones that He's chosen to bring about His will in this world, to make things better. With all the chaos going on around us, with all the violence, with all the sadness in this world, shouldn't there be somebody standing up for what's right? Shouldn't there be somebody doing what's good? It's you. It's me. We're the ones who are supposed to do good. In Ephesians chapter 4, starting in verse 11, from the New Living, he says, now these are the gifts Christ gave to the church. Apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do His work and to build up the church, the body of Christ. And this will continue until we all come to such unity in our faith and knowledge of God's Son that we will be mature in the Lord, measuring up to the full and complete standard of Christ. Then we will no longer be immature like children. We won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. We won't be influenced when people try to trick us with lies so clever that they sound like the truth. Instead, now listen carefully, instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of His body, the church. And this is where you and I come in. He makes the whole body fit together perfectly. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts grow so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. This is by what you do that makes other people able to do what they do. Without you doing your part, the goodness that should be accomplished through this body is never going to be accomplished. Without each one of us individually taking up a cross and following after Christ, surrendering ourselves to Him and taking on the humility that Christ displayed for us on His cross. You see, the answer to the turmoil you feel every day is not less self-esteem and it's not more self-esteem. It's finding your esteem in Jesus. It's Christ esteem. When people leave your presence after they've been with you, when our visitors leave today, what do you want them to say? I want them to say, I feel like I've been with Jesus. I want them to feel like they've been with Jesus, to walk away and feel like that person was totally into me. Because if you meet a truly humble person, you're not going to think, wow, they're a really humble person. What you're going to notice about them is how totally interested in you they were, and how invested they became in whatever it is that's going on in your life. And this is what Christ is calling us to, because that's what He did for us, isn't it? He came to this world. He invested Himself in your struggle, in your problem, your greatest problem, sin. And then He did something about it. And He's calling you to do the same thing. He's calling each one of us to take on His love, His service, and to do it with a humble gratitude for all that He's done for us. Today, if you're here and you need to surrender your heart to Christ, I encourage you to do that. If you want to build this body of believers up, if you want to make the church stronger right here at North Highlands, then let's get busy. Let's do the hard work of self-examination and change, that we might be more effective in the ministry of Christ. Whatever your need might be, won't you come while we stand and we sing?